Conmen, Scoundrels, and Rogues, and they happen to be involved in printing and publishing in Brattleboro, but really, a lot of the draw is the character. So I was so delighted to meet Rolf because Rolf is a true scholar, and there's nothing a librarian likes more than a scholar and a great reader. So it's been wonderful working with Rolf, who has made extensive use of our fabulous resources, especially those of our fabulous reference librarian, Jean Walsh.
Indeed.
Who could not be here, but who has helped him along his journey, and I feel happy to be going along for the ride tonight. So, that's it for Rolf.
So, thank you very much. I'll beg first to, do the old cell phone thing. Thanks. Meaning, turn it off. I've turned off mine. So I'm so glad to be here tonight. And yeah, here we have our Conmen, Scoundrels, and Rogues, or as I like to call them, MABs, men acting badly. And there's gradations in badly, right? I mean, as we all know from reading the news, there's a lot of gradations in bad. And so when I call them con men, I do it with a very important writing principle in mind, which is, thou shalt not libel the dead, okay? And so we've got a cast of characters here, and they're put in decreasing order of being able to sue. Like, if they were alive, I mean, they all can't sue because they're all very dead, right? I mean, presumably, depending on what you think about spiritualism. But if you work our way down this list, this is my personal ranking of if they were to be called a con man, which of these individuals? All right. So we've got T.P. James, Bradley Newell, and Red Austin, and I'm going to try to pace myself. I'm hoping we can get to Frank Baxter because he's the most entertaining type of con man because he's so good at it and so bad. Like, oh my God, he's completely incompetent and drops the ball and is caught repeatedly, which doesn't stop people from continuing to go to his shows, So, all right, so spiritualism factors into 3 of the 4, so I'm just going to briefly give you a crash course on that for those of you who may not be as familiar. The Fox sisters are in Rochester, New York, and they report and eventually get on stage claiming that they can channel spirits, especially of the beloved dead. And this is in Rochester in 1849, and it spreads like wildfire. The belief that you can channel or have somebody else communicate with the dead, spirits of the dead, and that it's okay, which is the second half of the problem, which has been maybe getting in the way of spiritualism before, because it actually says in the Bible that it's possible in the Old Testament, but it's forbidden. It's abomination. You will not consult spirits of the dead. But they made it popular and wonderful. And so a short time after their successful beginnings of their tour, we see music sheets like this, spirit rappings. It's just known as a phenomenon across the country, and commentators of the day are astounded by how quickly it spreads. So the question is, why? And very briefly, spiritualism isn't just seen as a way to communicate with the dead, it also confirms deeply held beliefs of especially liberal Christians, and especially universalists, who hold that there is no hell. And interestingly, in our case, Vermont, in other words, they actually, not only do the dead exist in the next life, but they can report back to us about how wonderful the next life is. And so this actually gets wrapped together in the package of liberal Christianity. And in Vermont, universalism is very widespread, and spiritualism is so widely accepted in the Universalist Church. Spiritualist preachers actually come, spiritualist speakers come, including Zella Hastings and others, to this church. This is on Canal Street. You may recognize the little pebble building next to it. Yep. So that's the Universalist Church. And as they saw it, this is deferring the coming onslaught of atheism, because it confirms that Christianity is real. Listen, angels talk to me. They actually talk to me, just yesterday. So I'm not mocking it. However, I know, I don't mean to mock it. All right, I seriously do not mean to, because it was a terrible thing for some of these people when the conmen started getting involved, because you can imagine how painful it was to be duped by conmen who are just in it for crass purposes. And confirming that your mother or your brother is no longer dead, must have been an incredibly powerful and positive experience. However, with great hope comes great gullibility. This is a picture of the Eddy brothers near Rutland. The Eddy brothers are operating schemes where they don't charge you to come over and experience their seances or their manifestations of ghosts. Because by the time we get to the Eddy brothers, they have these cabinets, and they're actually like coming out of the cabinet pretending to be materialized ghosts, and they walk around the room. But skeptics are also operating as well by the time the Eddy brothers are doing it. And so they get tackled. And so then the Eddy brothers then start as they're walking around in ghostly clothes. So then the Eddy brothers start putting people in the front rows who are believers. And then to get to the Eddy brothers and the ghosts is a little bit harder. So at any rate. So T.P. James has this business plan. And in 1873, tell the world you're writing novels of Charles Dickens, who died in 1870, and specifically, he died before he could finish Edwin Drood, which is a murder mystery, the only murder mystery which Dickens ever wrote. His friend Wilkie Collins had written murder mysteries, and so he finally launched into it, and then he dies, like halfway through. Everybody wants a copy of Edwin Drood, and we have one here at the library. So at any rate, write the novels, and his novels plural, because he also promises in some of his earliest marketing, and Dickens has also told me that I'm going to write the life and times of Bockley Wickleheap, which is a very Dickensian name, and of course, as well as the Humpback's Pilgrimage, and of course, 3, sell them, which he said Dickens expressly told him he could do. So why might Brattleboro have been attractive or susceptible to T.P. James? Well, did I mention that he had to move somewhere? This is the Jackson Mill, where his second wife was working, and he ran away with her, abandoning his second wife. Actually, this is his third. It gets confusing. Yeah. At any rate, there's a terrible scandal in Nashua. She's working the mill. She actually came from, I found her, I tracked her back to Vermont from her marriage certificate, which is here at the town hall. She was living in Irisburg, Vermont, and goes to Nashua, lives in the boarding house, which T.P. James' wife is running. And as a newspaper put it later, there was an explosion, and he had to go, as I say, he had to move somewhere fast. So she was probably 17, she may have been 18 when they eloped. So, another reason that T.P. James would have landed here specifically is that this was a printing town, well known as a printing town for a long time. T.P. James wanders with his at least third partner to a couple of different towns, but eventually comes here, and George Crowell, who's on that wall over there, is running a magazine started in 1868, which was The Household, and T.P. James actually takes over specifically the job printing offices of The Household from George Crowell, along with A.O. Libby, who it turns out was T.P. James' apprentice in the printing trade. And he also gets a job at the Record and Farmer, initially as a printer. The editor, Cobley, is very ill when T.P. James is here, and actually dies of tuberculosis. So he launches as the spirit pen of Charles Dickens in 1873. And I'm not going to read a lot of these newspaper accounts, but this one we'll go through. This was printed in the Springfield Union, and that's extremely important where it's printed. And this language is just beautiful. What makes it more beautiful is that another researcher, Andrew S. Cull, figured out that, or rediscovered, that T.P. James almost certainly wrote every word. Various reports have gotten abroad of this new apostle of spiritualism, and the village folk are even now unable to identify the prophet, who is without honor among them. One report makes him a printer, some 35 years of age, liar, he's older than that, and regularly employed in one of the printing offices, while others contend that he is a mechanic in Estey's organ factory, which is very interesting because the Estey organ factory had its own print shop and is sending music all over the world. So he may actually have been both. But whatever he be, he has a righteous horror of the ubiquitous reporter and is determined to keep his secret from the prying world, it being a cardinal requirement which he extorts from those whom he takes into his confidence, that his secret shall be sacredly kept. Beautiful, right? Another report current in the village is that Hill, as we shall call him, Hill is actually the name of his third partner. Hill, as we shall call him, is not the medium proper, but that the work is transmitted through a female in his family. He intends in a few days to retire entirely from the world and lock himself in seclusion to finish the work. In fact, he does register the book under M.A. Hill's name. And at the time, as you may recall, we said back here, Zella Hastings was one of the spiritualist ministers who came to talk, or speakers. There were a lot of women who are actually giving spiritualist talks because women were seen as being more sensitive, more intuitive, and it gave them access to the pulpits in a way that they didn't actually usually have. This is not my own original research. That general information has been documented by other authors. All right. So he's got that genius marketing. The article shows up first in the Springfield Union. It's reprinted in, of course, the Record and Farmer, as you know, where he's working, where the editor Coble is very ill. He may or may not, this is purely speculative, but you know, things may have gotten a little loose. Who knows? And so, yes, he completes the book. He says that actually, when it's registers, it says, there's just lie after lie you just accidentally stumble into. It says that it's published on Halloween, but the local newspapers show that it's published before then and has been selling for, you know, like a week and a half. But Halloween's a great little extra. So, anyways, it helps to be the person who discovers you, obviously, and maybe write your own review. So there's some great reviews of his stuff published in the Springfield Union. We don't know that he wrote it. But they print this very same book. This book is printed on the same presses that print the original article of his discovery. It's not looking good. Was he successful? Yes and no. He claims to have sold 30,000, but given the source, we don't know, right? But you can find these books all across the country. The spiritualist community, both locally and in Boston, completely embraces the work. Critics in the New York Times and the London Times, not so favorable. The best line was, oh, we entirely believe, paraphrase, not quote, we entirely believe that in Mr. James' story of the origin of the book, it's just a pity that when you die, you lose all of your writing talent. He works as a reporter in Boston in the 1890s, and that's where I've lost him. I don't know what happens to him after that. One of the last records I have for him is after his wife number 4 sells a local property, which he signs his name to. But bear in mind, despite the fight by Cloran and Nichols on women's property rights, her property is his property. Shortly after they sell it, he's gone. So, and then he disappears, as I say, sometime in the 1890s in Boston. So what right do we have to label this man, at least, a cad? Well, we've got the Mr. A thing by basically the business about who's this mysterious Mr. A, the false story. He has either 5 or 7 wives. I'm working on like to see, there may even be 8. So basically you just keep turning over stuff and go, oh my God, here's the T.P. James in Maine where he's living. He moves there shortly thereafter. Somebody named T.P. James gets married again, a couple towns over. So at any rate, we'll see. At least 3 of them have been known to be abandoned. You probably wouldn't want your sister to marry this guy, so that kind of counts as cad. And on the last day when he's in Maine, he on the very last issue of the Stamford Herald, which he established, he asked for new newspaper subscriptions. He now says, oh, it's been a wonderful year. Please get in your subscriptions and your advertisements. And in less than a week, he's in Waltham at a new newspaper because we have the publishing date of the first issue, and he's there. So it's not looking very good, again. So, however, if you're going to call someone a cad, there is this issue of like how sincere is the individual. Is it possible, of course, because as we said at the start, there's gradations of acting badly. You can completely not believe anything that you're doing, and that's like the utter con man, right? But interestingly, his first marriage was when he was 18, and he was married to a 15-year-old at this church, and it turns out it's a Universalist church. So that's interesting. A.O. Libby, his partner here in town, was a lifelong Universalist. Found that out in an obituary. So, and the books that he's selling in town, which include one book which declares, because it's inspired by a spirit, he takes the authority to say that what was previously considered adultery might just be a new spiritual marriage. And so he's living his life kind of like that. So at any rate, as you know, I'm just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt that there may have been some sincere beliefs in his actions. Moving on, any questions on spiritualism or T.P. James or other? Great. Here is Bradley Newell. I love Bradley Newell. And he's an example of someone that I stumbled upon. Like I was not searching for Bradley Newell. He found me. Or there was this strange story and I didn't understand it, and so then I had to read, and then I had to read, and I had to read more. And lo and behold, Bradley Newell was really famous in his day, and he's making a killing in Brattleboro. And so this gets to the train. Train lets con men in and also lets them go on speaking tours, lets them out. So this is their train here in Brattleboro. And basically you can have a whole speaking tour. You can go to a town, do your job, get back on the train, get back to the next town. You can figure out where the most profitable towns are to stay. If you're doing anything with spiritualism, you can find out in advance where some of the best speaking halls are. And so the modern speaking tour circuit is off and away. So here's his business plan. Tell the world you hear voices, starting in August of 1896. Remember that date. There won't be a quiz, but it's a really good date. August of 1896. Make no grandiose claims, but accept payment. So there may have been other marketers. I want to find out if there are, but who worked this angle. He worked the famous angle of, I'm not saying that this will cure you, but many people have. So get a manager and a hotel room and hit the rails. And so here's this article over here, which is, this article is repeated all over the country. And so you can actually write a story and have it telegraphed as a press release to other newspapers. There's already like a wire service. So it says in a little Vermont village of Jacksonville, he's just like all the other blacksmiths the village has ever seen, but then he started hearing voices, and next thing you know, it told him that he could heal people. And he's not claiming that it's from a religious agency or spiritual. He says, I don't know. It works though sometimes. And was he successful? Yes, exclamation point. So the Journal of the American Medical Association reports that hundreds of people flocked to Brattleboro on the trains coming from hundreds of miles away. He makes the equivalent of, adjusted for inflation, $650,000 in 1896. in 1 year, like his first year of marketing. Talk about a successful marketing plan, like holy smokes. Is he successful? Yes! Oh, that is so sad. He messed with that slide. That's not my fault. No, that was T.P. James. He claimed not to be a spiritualist, except that he held a seance in Brattleboro. At any rate, he became a state legislator in Vermont. And and the Journal of American Medical Association is interested in him because can you guess what committee they put him on? Health and medicine. So they're like, what? I just want to take a little detour here and say, I'm taking the detour because this slide looks like this. This is an example. There's just one article here about Bradley Newell, and it's about him going to Lake Pleasant, which is just down in Montague, which you can get to by train again. But more interestingly, from a writer and research perspective, most of these other stories on the page just beg to be investigated. And so that's one of the beautiful things about this, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. I intentionally saved that page as an example of how you start poking around in the back aisles of Chronicling America, you find all this stuff. I mean, Richard Sheldon, an F.D. Hale, ex-state auditor, has been appointed assistant and private secretary to Major Ladd, now treasurer of the island of Cuba. And my brain goes, whoa, like, okay, we got some imperialism to check out there. So, and Major Ladd is also a native of Thetford. So we've got a Vermont, Cuba. I'm not, who knows where that goes? Maybe nowhere. Just last night, I bumped into the existence, which some of you may have known, of the Hamilton and Knowlton College, which in Brattleboro was trying to establish Brattleboro as the center of aviation research. We're taking a little detour here. They were buying up planes and flying them from the airport, in the local airport. They're buying up the fastest planes and trying to get like engineers and speed racers and mechanics all coming here. So I'd never heard it. So you just bump into these things. So, okay, back on track. Here we go. So was Newell successful? Yeah, he was one of the first automobile owners in the area. He bought a 1909 white steamer, cost estimate 8 times the median income. He also bought a steamboat launch. You don't really need a steamboat launch for Lake Sadaga, if you're familiar with Lake Sadaga. But he also bought a hotel nearby and a bottling plant. Too bad about the bottling plant investment. People stopped buying it when they noticed that the bottles turned green. So that little venture didn't work out. So what right do we have to call this man a cad? Well, I mean, I'm going to jump ahead just a second here. When you compare it to some of the medical cures that were available at the time, this is Hunt's remedy, which is now believed to maybe have contained mercury. The laying of hands doesn't really look so bad. Now, this is obviously just a patent medicine, but even the medical profession is sometimes prescribing straight up mercury to heal you. So, but on the other hand, there's Bradley Newell's shortage. So he was state legislator. He managed to become the treasurer of Row, Massachusetts, and then left with the funds for the town. Disappeared. Sent a postcard from Maine. That's the last we know of him. Also, in a kind of curious pattern, his wife's niece disappeared at exactly the same time. And cad. We're going to go with cad. Okay. So the question is, if he was a complete and utter con man, why would you stop? If it's just about money, you make more than $600,000 in a year and you stop, and you start investing in all these schemes. I mean, what was wrong with what you had going? 2, where did he go? And most interestingly, did trauma play a role in his whole story? And are you guys familiar with the difference the largely proclaimed difference between Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. Has anyone heard that like whole, contrast, compare and contrast? So Dostoevsky, he doesn't know that like his characters are gonna commit suicide in chapter 4. He thinks that they're the perfect person to argue his philosophy, and they do a terrible job, like the words that come out of their mouth. He doesn't know what's gonna happen, right? Likewise, I didn't know that I was gonna stumble on this. And Samuel Niles, who is quite deaf, was run over Sunday the 14th, this is May 14th, near Stowe and Clark's by Bradley Newell of Jacksonville. He runs over a deaf man 3 months before he claims to start hearing voices that tell him that he can cure people. Samuel dies days later. By a freak researching coincidence, I found out that his son later, like 20 years later, is horribly killed by a horse, just to throw that in there. I'm searching for Niles and death, and it didn't work well with them and horses, just like some people and bicycles. But at any rate, so you've got to wonder. I mean, it's at the level of speculation, but you have to include that in the story. And the beautiful thing about writing is it's so recursive, you can later decide where to place that in your story. You don't have to wait to the end. At any rate, any questions on Bradley Newell or? Yeah.
Not really about Bradley Newell, but that first slide with the train looked like it was going right over the street, over that bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Where was that?
That's at the bottom of Arch Street.
And where was the train?
Can I look at it with you later? I'm glad to pop it up, but it's I don't know exactly. I just know that it's the same train system, but those tracks have been moved a couple times.
It was going over Main Street.
It's going, I think it's actually, you're looking down from the bridge, down the Whetstone, and it's farther down. It's down like halfway down, I think.
Okay, so
like after the first dip of the waterfall, yeah.
It was just the way the photo looked.
Yeah, I'd be glad to call it up at the end too.
Question,
Yeah.
and this is referencing back somewhat. In terms of religious pursuit, were there blockages for women getting involved with traditional ministry and things like that?
Yeah,
If there were
yeah.
blockages, is that another reason why spiritualism ended up being a side door for them?
I think specifically with most of the church, even the Universalist Church, didn't have female ministers. But you could have a spiritualist speaker come in and tell you what she'd been told from a spirit, and she could basically be almost the equivalent of a prophet. I mean, she could really make declarations about justice and righteousness and right and wrong. So, yeah, it very much, you could either look at it as an end run or another way in. It literally was another way into the pulpit. So this guy is a real piece of work. This guy, we're working our way down lower and lower into the depths of bad, right? This is a real mab. Red Austin, king of the bunco men. So notice it says from a portrait. This was sent to me by a reference librarian in Cincinnati. And it says from a portrait at police headquarters because they had a hell of a time getting a picture of this guy. Like he made it very difficult. How they got a drawing, I don't know. So Red Austin's business plan sends scouts ahead to locate wealthy farmers and travel by train with a gang of impersonators to the farmer's hometown and accidentally cross paths with the target and make an incredible offer. This book was published here in Brattleboro by the Transcript Publishing Company by Jacob J. Ullery. It's the History of Vermonters, Sons of Vermont. Basically, it's a big Facebook of rich Vermonters who are ripe for the plucking. So the scout goes ahead, finds books like this, and here is Denison Davis, very wealthy, successful horse trader, farmer, Putney Select Board member for many, many years. Just, there he is. You know, they oh dear. So they go up to his place in Putney, they bump into him, they strike up a conversation, and basically this is the gist of what he had to relate. I know of a farm for sale cheap. It was over in Keene, supposedly. Want to go for a ride in my carriage to your bank? And this is what they did over and over again. And Denison Davis says, sounds like a great idea, and goes straight to the Vermont National Bank. And this gang had a common practice of they would supply a black box. They had another identical one just like it. Money would be, oh, here's a box, keep your money safe in this. And in the carriage ride home, you go in. Unfortunately, in his case, that may not have worked because they set fire to his barn. And I won't say more about the barn, except if you do your own research, you'll find out horrible things about that barn. But, so maybe it should have been burned down. But at any rate, he didn't feel that way. While they're putting out the fire, if that's when they think the house may have been burgled, doesn't matter. Bottom line is, money gone. So, in walks John Norris. We're not actually sure if this is John Norris. For right now, it's a holding cell. It may actually be John Norris, but yeah. So John Norris is one of the most famous detectives of his day. He gets his fame by parading criminals through the streets of Cincinnati. Cincinnati is a really, 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 really corrupt place in the 1870s. At any rate, John Norris, or a man claiming to be John Norris at the least, shows up at Denison Davis's place and says, I'm chasing men who robbed you. Want to give me money to catch them? And he comes to meet him at the Brooks House Motel. Okay, let's go. And they go straight to the bank. And that's the last, no, he gets 2 reports back. He says, I'm about to spring my trap, and then silence. So the question becomes, was he really part of the gang or not? He was the detective someone claiming to be John Norris coming with papers to free Red Austin was arrested with $20,000. But John Norris also did arrest these gang members. So since these guys are great impersonators, it might just have been a situation where if you impersonate your enemy, and you can get him in a lot of trouble and maybe, nip him in the bud, his future exploits to try to arrest you. So, or the other possibility is that he corrupted him, because in 3 years' time, there's no FBI at the time, right? But there's various police departments who put their heads together and look at all the people who've made complaints. And after adjusted for inflation, this gang took in $12 million. So with that money, you're completely immune. They bribed judges, jailers, policemen. Oh, I don't know where he was. He was just with me, and I was walking to jail, and he disappeared. And in South Bend, Indiana, they managed, on the very last day that the state's attorney was in office, he suddenly, after being told by the governor, you are absolutely not to release Red Austin under any circumstances to anybody, if they've got papers from anywhere except for the specific jail. Because so many times people had showed up with papers and freed them. At any rate, so this editorial really captivates it. That a man who is known to have committed so many crimes and to be so dangerous to society as Red Austin is permitted to go free is calculated to cause honest men to doubt the character of the protection they are taxed to maintain. This is my favorite Red Austin story. I stumbled on this near the end. They're down at the bottom. So again, it says he's been identified and he's arrested. But the last sentence jumped out at me. It says, Salisbury, Connecticut officers will come here tomorrow to take the alleged swindler there for trial. I come from Salisbury, Connecticut. There is no courthouse. I checked with the Salisbury Historical Society. There was no court, there were no officers coming from Salisbury, Connecticut. So I think we do have time for J. Frank Baxter, and I'm very happy because, as I say, he's the worst and the best. So Edward Crosby is a Brattleboro businessman and a spiritualist ally. He constructs, among other buildings, if you can see up there, it says Harmony Hall. This photo is actually from the early 20th century. But here it says that Frank Baxter is coming from Boston, and he's going to be speaking in Harmony Hall. And many spiritualists things happen. Harmony Hall, by the way, is in the Harmony parking lot. Back here, this is the back of the market block, which is where this is the back of where the Blueberry House is.
Yeah.
Okay?
So there's like a big parking lot where that.
There's a big parking lot where this is. There are Harmony Halls all across the country, and they're all spiritualist halls. I shouldn't say all, but there are many spiritualist halls called Harmony Hall. This catwalk is coming across. If you go to the back of Bagel Works and look up, you'll see a wooden door just hanging out, going to nowhere. And that's where this is.
Oh, wow.
So, his trade was blue booking. And blue booking is where you go ahead to the next town. No, you know where your towns are. They're all laid out on the train stations, right? You read the obituaries before you get there, and you actually have subscriptions to the newspapers that, of the towns on your whole route. And so you take advantage of the element of time. You have the subscriptions, you clip out all your clippings, then you go on your tour. And you show up and you go, oh, I have a fever, I feel hot. My name is John Markley, and then someone in the crowd, either planted or truly impressed, says, John Markley died of scarlet fever 4 years ago. And you're set. And then you convey information that John Markley wants to convey. So that's blue booking. Unfortunately for J. Frank Baxter, he's working the circuit, he's going to the train. This was reported on in the Phoenix, one of our local newspapers. And then he realizes he left his folders with all of his obituaries back at the hotel. And he runs back and comes in completely, well, the way I look sometimes, which, just, oh my God, where did I leave my things? And they've already opened up the folders and are shocked to find that they're full of obituaries for the town that he's in and all the towns north on the line. Not good. So he also, I don't know if you can read this here. I came upon this in Chronicling America, which is a free website that we'll talk about later. It says, J. Frank Baxter gave a very eloquent speech in Putney, and he lists, these are the names of the people that he supposedly channeled. And so you better believe I went through and picked out all these names. There's a Daniel Belknap and a Martha South, and I picked out every one of these names and tried to find out if I could find the obituaries. And I came up blank, except for one, Mr. Belknap. And, here we are. See what I mean? I'm like J. Frank Baxter. His obituary wasn't included, but I could find out. This said that it was about who died. Let's see, he gave, where's Mr. Belknap? Of West Dummerston, giving the circumstance of his drowning 3 years ago. So it's not in the Phoenix, but I found the date, and I went and actually looked on the microfilms here, the Vermont Record and Farmer, and Mr. Belknap, J. Frank Baxter, you can choose. Either he was channeling Daniel Belknap, or he read the obituary in the Vermont Record and Farmer, because he got drunk and drowned in a pool of water. So he knew that specific detail. It sounds great, but, so at any rate, these are just some of the materials that I used. And I wanted to talk to you about Chronicling America, which is this free site. You can access this from your home and start wandering into these great histories. And I also wanted to tell you, just in general, that we've got the People, Places, and History of Words grant has come to town, because we've got 5 nonprofits that have come together that are working on it. And there's various levels that you can get involved in. One, and this may seem like heady stuff, we're actually looking for people who are interested in leading others doing research on a words and a place in the Brattleboro area. So that's something that may appeal to some of you. We're also looking for someone to write a chapter of a book on the Brattleboro area and the history of words. And by the way, if this strikes you of interest, you can talk to me later, but you could either email William, or that's my other email. My email may be easier to remember, which is why I've got it up there. And then this is the book, same thing. You could either write info@writeaction.org or my email, booksfromvermont@yahoo. Or this is really more what I'm out to talk to you about today, because I suspect most people here are probably more interested in this as a possibility. The easiest way to get involved with this larger grant, which is about learning more and publicizing more and creating a talking tour, an audio tour, sorry, of specific places that are related to the printing and publishing and words in general, peoples, places, and the history of words. The easiest way to get involved is to be a history scout. So if you find an interesting fact, person, or story, if you write one sentence about why it's interesting to you, you copy the URL from the Chronicling America page, which I'm going to show you, and you can just paste all that into an email to me. You would be the original, you may find very original stuff. As I was saying, just last night I stumbled upon this whole college on aviation in Brattleboro. I mean, like, what? What? So this is, so there are some rules that I've, or some not rules, but tips. One is to use Chronicling America because it's free. You can access it from home. There are other great databases available here at the library, but just for maximal ease of use, I'd recommend checking out that. It's a project by the NEH and the Library of Congress where they're digitizing newspapers. I've been able to chase like T.P. James from state to state to state using Chronicling America. I can see, what he's up to. This is just that thing where I was showing you where if you go on there, you can actually find, in one column, you can find a ton of information, a ton of possible leads. And to get started as a writer, I'm just throwing out the possibility to consider writing for free. So I know some people in this room have also posted stuff up in iBrattleboro. But I wrote my original first history pieces and just put them up on iBrattleboro. And it got me just interested in the topic, just had too much time on my hands, obviously. But I actually even managed to get a job out of putting things up on iBrattleboro. An editor saw something and contacted me and said, hey, would you like to apply for this job? So another tip I have in general is, this has really helped me enormously, is don't be a Tolstoy. As I was saying, Tolstoy knew everything from the beginning, but he wasn't necessarily open to like that Bradley Newell thing that I mentioned, where I found out that he'd run over some deaf man months before. I found that at last. And there's no harm, because writing is such a recursive process that even though that wasn't part of my original story, I can take that information and figure out where the best place is to introduce that fact. I can rewrite the first paragraph, the second, third, fourth, fifth. Any of the paragraphs can be rewritten. And if you're open and you're Dostoevsky, it's actually more of a feverish writing experience, you could say. And when you read, those of you who are familiar with both of the writings, I find Dostoevsky much more readable, because he's exploring and he's finding out, and he's also a genius, but so is Tolstoy, but this is more plotted out. Maybe this is more like a symphony and this is Chopin, and I would say in general, it makes for much more readable history. And that's really the goal. I think it was Barbara Tuchman who said that she wrote a bunch of famous history books, but basically, you want your histories, whether they're long or short, to be page turners. You want them to be exciting stories. And that is my talk. Whoop. Any questions? Yeah.
These are master scammers with, great dramatic stories. Does anybody have any idea what the proportion is of like ordinary petty scammers? And I'd really be interested in incompetent schlemiels who are kind of trying to be scammers.
The thing is, their stories are harder to find because they don't get printed in necessarily more than one newspaper, where the big guys are traveling around and making a mess over such a wide geography and have multiple chances to get in print. And also, the big scammers are intentionally sending their stories out and publicizing, their information. So that, I don't know. I do know that Houdini wrote a great book about Conmen and how their whole racket of preying on farmers, and that there was a huge amount of this going on. But the Red Austin is fascinating because he starts off in Cincinnati, but even before Cincinnati, he's on the riverboats, before they clean up the riverboats on the Mississippi. So you've got like 4 people at a poker table, they're all working together, but it looks like they're gambling, and then they get the farmer, prosperous farmer in the game, and of course at first he's winning, and so he's betting, and then he's losing, but nobody else loses because they just divide up the money. So that type of petty thing turns into a big organized crime gang eventually. But there's million more of these gamblers, con artists than.
Walk down the street and there's street card Monte. And,
yeah, right.
Somebody comes up to you to sell you a valuable watch that's pretending it's stolen goods that's really cheap.
Right. Yeah, no, and now, of course, I haven't gotten an email in a while from Nigerian Prince, but it's constant. Now, of course, some of the scammers do it legally or with impunity, right? Like, there have been numerous cases in the last 10 years of big banks doing absolutely outrageously illegal things. It just blows your mind. Even laundering money for, I think it was HSBC, which was caught basically being terrorist drug cartel money handlers, and slap, and they're on their way. Yeah.
You didn't mention it, so I'm guessing that no, this was not part of their tool bag.
Yeah.
But with these specific scammers, was the use of violence at all one of the tools they used?
Sometimes, definitely, but mostly, of all the scammers that I talked about, Red Austin, well, it's hard, I should say definitely. Some of the people that he associated with were certainly violent. When he was arrested, I suppose that's a special circumstance, but he didn't manage to shoot the people who were trying to arrest them, but he tried. But he was accused of, when he couldn't bribe witnesses, of threatening them with certain death, and so they don't show up at the trial, and whoops, he goes free. But of them all, he's really, T.P. James, he's entertaining you. You can choose to be deceived if you want, or even if you don't. He did write some 20 chapters, so, much more than I've ever written. And again, the laying of hands, Bradley Newell, he's not really doing any harm. J. Frank Baxter, where he's persuading you that your dead loved one is talking to you, he may be doing harm. Red Austin is ruining people. He is taking their life savings. He may have hit some families with generational poverty. We don't know, but when you take millions of dollars from just farmers, who in some cases were wealthy, but you're taking, sums that, who knows, but and certainly there's without compunction, so. Of them all, he would be the scariest to bump into as a ghost.
And I should have been specific, physical violence.
Yeah, Red Austin's the only one who's associated with other people who are sometimes violent of this group. Yeah.
So have you ever read the complete Edward Wood?
I have not read all of it. I found it a little bit difficult to keep pushing through. Some of the harsher critics seem to me to be closer to the truth when reviewing it than. But I'd want to say, actually, that Chris here is the person who pointed out something to me fascinating about the actual Edwin Drood, the book Edwin Drood, because in one of the chapters on the wall that Dickens wrote.
Right.
Do you want to tell? You're welcome to. Okay.
You probably remember it better. I don't know.
So on the wall, there's some initials, and they're TPJ, but they're not. It's in reverse. It's JPT is written on, and it's a mystery within in the Dickens novel as to whose initials these are.
It's like it's a scene in a street in London or something.
It's on the wall, I think, actually, of Mr. Grigas's house, I thought.
Oh.
But anyways, it's on a wall, and it's a mystery, and the person contemplates, well, who could this be? Like, could that, whose initials are they? And so it's just curious, little extra, I like to explain it away as T.P. James read that and then was like, damn it, that's it! As opposed to any other more cosmic explanation. Yeah?
How long did each of these scallywags spend in Brattleboro or around?
I think we can do it in decreasing order. So Red Austin, just a very short time. His gang tries another scam in Brattleboro, but somebody who declines to go for a carriage ride. But so he's hardly anywhere for long. T.P. James was here the longest, yeah, because he actually was here from 1869 or 70 to 1879.
Didn't he start the Brattleboro Reformer?
He was one of the two original publishers and editors of the Windham County Reformer, which merges with the Phoenix to become eventually the Brattleboro Reformer. Yeah, but he splits, he gets in some kind of row with Davenport, who's the other publisher, and then he opens up a new newspaper called The Independent. And the only thing we know about The Independent is that one newspaper called it is spicy and saucy. That's all they had to say about it. And then another newspaper said that this type of journalism, which is just meant to attack Davenport, fortunately has a short life. And sure enough, we can't find any copies of it, and it seems that it only existed for a short time. So, yeah. Yeah.
As people go through the Words Project and identify places that we want to research, what other clues can we get about the past besides newspapers? What are some of the other documents?
Yeah, let's go back to that.
Some of the public files available. I mean, how else do you sort of pick apart all the...
So I start with the newspapers, but it's kind of, I'll use just T.P. James as an example. So T.P. James also included trips to the town vault, so there I found out, there's a lot of information we didn't touch on here, but I did find, like, as I say, the sale of his fourth wife's property, which was here in Brattleboro. There was a postcard.
Town vault?
If you go to the town hall, most New England towns have these. It's like a room that's fireproof and floodproof, and it's got the oldest records in it. It's just the records. Yeah, in the town clerk's office. Yeah, but it's great to go into. It's like you're in this little room. And there's all these books, and at any rate, so there was also a postcard. If you search online for postcards, you can sometimes find people who are selling these things, and I bought that postcard and then scanned it. But basically, postcards can give you like pictures of objects and sometimes have information on them, so you can actually look for postcards online. There's a great page called Find a Grave, and using that, I determined that there was a slave catcher who was born in Brattleboro, and I wasn't sure if it was the same guy until I had his tombstone. And then it said, born in Brattleboro, and it was his tombstone in Georgia. He's another, obviously, Mab, very, very, very bad guy. But at any rate, but also, at the Historical Society here, the library microfilms. Some of those, there are a lot of the materials in the microfilms are actually already digitized on other sites. But, I have here the Annals of Brattleboro, just a tangent on that. She's a very famous author who wrote about Brattleboro, but she has to be treated carefully because sometimes when you look at the original sources, what she had to say and what's really true don't always match up. And in some cases, she's just copying another researcher. But so, yeah, the deeds.
What does this mean when it says quack doctor?
I'm just trying to make sure that I cited everything. Quackdoctor.com was where I got that picture of the mercury of the medicine. There's a website which is dedicated to patent medicines called quackdoctor.com. And it actually makes for great reading. It's really a great site. Family Search actually is also a great one. FamilySearch.com is also free, and you can get a lot of information there. I used it here at the library. The library has a subscription to Ancestry.com. That was hugely useful.
Hey, Rolf.
Yeah.
I want to put in a plug for people who are doing local research and want to find photographs. Do you know about the Porter Thayer collection?
Yeah, I think that's most of that is available through the Brattleboro Historical Society.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah, so for folks who don't know.
It's actually been digitized, and it's in the University of Vermont.
Okay. Listen to Jared, not me.
But yeah, it's searchable too.
So Porter Thayer was a photographer when photography was really new. I think he might have been born in Newfane, but he took a lot of photographs in and around Windham County, including some of Brattleboro. And a lot of his photographs were used in the postcard trade too. Yeah. And so his collection is pretty incredible, and like Jerry said, you could find it on the UVM website. It's digitized, and it's really cool. They're really cool photographs.
Just if I could add an aside.
Yeah.
I think the photographers that went out as part of, in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what that program was
Works
called.
Project.
Yeah.
The WPA.
And I mean, many came to Brattleboro, and a lot of those photos are at I think they're
Your library
National Archives.
Right.
And I know I've spent hours scanning through, like, oh, that's what High Street looks like.
Yeah, my God, it's amazing. Yeah.
So,
I was wondering, on one of your frames there, you had Bradley Newell at Lake Pleasant.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you might like to talk a little bit about the importance of Lake Pleasant and spiritualism.
Sure. So Lake Pleasant is, and I'll also throw this out there just as a warning, that I made a mistake, and I at one point thought that T.P. James may have been drawn here by Lake Pleasant. But actually Lake Pleasant, which is a spiritualist retreat, Methodists were also going out to Lake Pleasant originally, and it was basically a bunch of cottages around a lake in just over the border on the train line in Montague. And basically, as spiritualism picked up, started really in 1847, 1849, but it spreads like wildfire, and a wealthy individual in Greenfield helps establish, I believe he was associated with the Greenfield Recorder, but at any rate, they helped establish this spiritualist retreat, and it takes off like wildfire. First, there's just a bunch of tents, and people are meeting together, and enjoying the lake, and then it has a train station, a hotel, it has markets. It's a whole spiritualist community. Some people start to overwinter, and you can see spectacular things there. You can go into a tent, and there's, I can't remember her name now, but there's a woman who's a floral medium, which means you're sitting there, and flowers materialize and drop down and land on the table while you're all holding hands, because she could materialize flowers. Then she cranked it up a notch, and she started materializing fish. Fish would flop about on the table. You know, then how you do the circus trick, I don't know, but it wasn't probably too easy on the fish. I'm assuming that they may have either eaten the fish or taken them to Lake Pleasant and chucked them in, you know, as a compassionate service. But at any rate, that's a pretty nifty trick. I don't know. So I'm assuming she pulled a string and it released, I don't know. But at any rate, she actually comes to Brattleboro. I wish I could remember her name, but and another, you could also get spiritualist photographers, which is you would take a picture first. This gets a little bit creepy, frequently of like a child, but you'd only partially expose it. So like there'd just be a faint image of a child, and then you'd set that aside. And then someone would come in knowing that you're a spiritualist photographer, and they'd pose there, and they'd make sure that they knew that the child was on the left hand of the photo, and they'd put the chair and they'd sit you there and they'd re-expose it, right? So if you cover over half of the lens, light doesn't hit the back of the negative. And so then, oh man, is this your child in this photo? So B.P. Brown, actually, we have record of a spiritual photographer who came on the train from Boston after going to Lake Pleasant, you know, it's just all predictable, came to Brattleboro and was working and selling his services. So, yeah.
So what was so horrible about Denby's barn?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, Dennis and Davis's barn. I almost want to stick to my, actually this will encourage you to go and research. No, this will encourage you to go research. Dennis and Davis barn death. Okay, you put those in, Chronicling America, you're going to find a horrible story. And that happened to his grandfather. So, yeah. Yes?
Did any of these fellows ever meet up with any of the other members?
Well, fascinatingly, some of them are in town at the same time. So I sure like to imagine, you know, like T.P. James, you know, talking with J. Frank Baxter, and then you know, but I don't know. I mean, it's possible that they actually, maybe they never reveal themselves to each other, you know? I don't know. McNeil's was a fire station at the time, but they could have gone to the Brooks house where you know, there was a bar in the basement there, supposedly.
It's funny that the rise of spiritualism seems concurrent with the whole water cure phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, what predates spiritualism is magneticism, which is who's I can't find the guy's name. Sorry, but at any rate, in Europe there was somebody who started demonstrating his ability to heal people through magnetic healing and Mesmer, right? Yeah, well, so is spiritualism. In Brattleboro, here's another fun Google search. You can find more than one therapist who is trained in cognitive behavioral therapy and channeling, you know, so it can go back and forth between those modalities, you know, I mean, so, yeah.
Just, what's really amazing is the ties of spiritualism to the women's rights.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, which is, again, so the Fox sisters, it turns out, when they leave their home, they go to Rochester and they start performing. They're taken in by Quakers, a Quaker family. I think the name is Rice, but I'm fuzzy on that. So delete that from the tape, Reggie. I'm not sure about Rice. But at any rate, but the Quakers are passionate advocates and reformers. In Brattleboro, that Harmony Hall was also, besides being a place where spiritualists could come and lecture and give seances, it's also Crosby and others, including Carpenter, I believe. But at any rate, Crosby and others are part of the Reform League or the Reform Association of America, and it's all about basically all of the progressive causes of the day. And it's the women's rights. There's a more than one great book out there, but one great book is called Other Powers, which talks about how Seneca Falls actually had, the women's rights movement starting at Seneca Falls actually had a very strong and specific connection to spiritualism. And Victoria Woodhull, who's just a giant in both the women's rights movement and spiritualism, and has a connection to Brattleboro in a strange roundabout way, in that Jim Fisk, who's thoroughly from Brattleboro, and is the robber baron that many of you may know, one of his sideline schemes is a spiritualist investment firm run by Victoria Woodhull. So basically, Jim Fisk provides information about basically what's coming down the pike. Victoria Woodhull turns it into like, oh, you should invest in silver, I think. And her female clients make a killing. So that's all covered in this book called Other Powers.
The book that I came across was one by Anne Broddy, Radical Spiritualism and Women's Rights in the 19th Century America.
Yeah, it's covering the same territory. This is mostly centered on Victoria Woodhull, but really talks about the whole connection. So yeah, 2 great books. Yeah.
Obsessive Wild Dreams, is that a website?
Well, so those I can't gift you, but I can tell you that it's delicious to read these stories. And so I have insomnia, but the question is it really insomnia, or is it like, oh, I've woken up and I could just go check on the computer, So it becomes a very delicious type of activity, and especially if you're not trying to be Tolstoy and plot out something that you know. If you launch on, thought I was reading about this, but what the heck is this about? This is much more interesting, and you can be the first person to chase it down. I'm sure that other people in Brattleboro, especially at the Historical Society, already know about this Hamilton Knowlton College, but I've never heard about it before, and I'm willing to bet that that would be a great thing to plunge into, locally. And speaking of which, earlier we had a mention about pods and people leading research. On the back wall is John Holbrook. He is hugely important to Brattleboro's history and to Brattleboro's publishing and printing history. And what Joe Rivers stumbled on would make a great pod. And what he stumbled on is that John Holbrook, who is so important to Brattleboro's early history and getting things started in the economy, he's deeply involved in slavery. And his house is at the top of the green, but he shows up. I've only just started looking more deeply, but he also was on the board of directors of a bank, the Phoenix Bank in Hartford, and there are documents that I'm trying to get from other libraries. But basically, that would be a great thing to research with other people. So I've been contemplating doing a pod myself. It's hard because there's so many great things to be involved with in this project, but that's a great one. And it's certainly very tied to the publishing and printing history in Brattleboro. So, yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing, with the rise of spirituality.
Yeah. Or spiritualism,
spiritualism.
Yeah.
In the late 1800s. I mean, T.P. James is writing, it was only like 8 years after the Civil War.
Yeah.
That was like massive nationwide trauma.
Absolutely, right.
So I think people were actually trying to get in touch with.
Right, you have an irrecoverable sudden loss.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I said earlier that I wasn't mocking it, I actually, truth and I really don't know what I believe about an afterlife. I'm not approaching this as, laughing at other people's desires, but you can see how easy it is to want to believe and get fooled by those who are willing to manipulate and trick you. And this goes across a lot of different, clearly a lot of different areas in our lives, but this one I think is a particularly mean-spirited one for people to have exploited. So. But it's also just so shockingly laughable sometimes. I mean, the people, when you get to the level of pretending to be a ghost and walking around outside of a cabinet, I mean, if we turned off the lights in here, you'd no longer be fooled. But back then, it was possible to really fool people. So.
Did any of these people, was Madame Cherie and her whole scene over there and across the river, was that later, or was that part of this?
I've never heard an association, but that's much later. However, it's interesting to note that after World War I and after World War II, there were also upticks in the interest in spiritualism. You know, again, with, as Chris was mentioning, with massive death, there came, again, deep interest. So. Oh, yeah, Barry.
There's a free use research archive here in Brattleboro, which I'm somewhat connected to. And if you want information on its access, it's in downtown Brattleboro. But basically, it's all original paper material from the 1800s through the 20th century. Most of it is 19th century material. And it's the largest private archive in the country. And basically, every single specific topic that was mentioned tonight is applicable to the archive as far as searching out the information. So after the talk, I'll be happy to give anybody information.
And also, I forgot to say that I've started scanning the Vermont Record and Farmer because we have those microfilms here in the library, and those are available on some pay-for-use sites, but I'm going to be starting to include them on my Books from Vermont site, but we may also have them on our project site as well. We're still figuring out where all that happens. But at any rate, if you go to Books from Vermont, you will see I'm going to be uploading these PDFs, high-quality scans of various newspapers, Vermont Record and Farmer, which is a hugely important newspaper here in Brattleboro. And not just because T.P. James was associated with it, despite what some of you may think about my bias. So.
Can I just do a quick plug for
Yeah.
the project? Because if anybody's interested to learn more about the Words Project, it's the Brattleboro, just look up Brattleboro Words, and you'll go to the site, and there's a list that's constantly being added to places that we're looking at for research, for this kind of collective community research. Schools are doing it, and we're forming these pods. Pods could even be one person, it doesn't have to be a group. So if you're interested in any of that, you can follow the brattleborowords@gmail.com and just sort of say, yeah, I'm interested in being part of it. There's budgets associated with doing the research that we're providing and all kinds of support. And all the work's going to feed into one website, which will be a mapping of the Brattleboro area for walking, biking, and driving tours of these sites and the history behind them. So any work you do is going to contribute to this larger effort that's going to live way beyond the research itself. So take a look at the website. We'd love to have people participate.
Wow, great. Thank you so much for having me.